What was the starting point for this exhibition?
I first became aware of Ebola probably back in about 2008. I was travelling with a friend in the Congo and travelling through the jungle, and there were unmarked graves by the side of the tracks in the jungle. So I asked the guy who was guiding us through, I said, what's that all about? And he said, well, people have died of Ebola. And I'd heard of it before, but I hadn't actually seen it manifest itself like that. And he told me how it was hemorrhagic fever. So I sort of became aware of it then, and it sort of imprinted itself in my consciousness for obvious reasons. So when the Ebola outbreak happened in Sierra Leone and Liberia and Guinea, I took notice. I was very interested. And I thought I'd really very much like to somehow ally my work with that area, whilst making sure it wasn't voyeuristic or done for the wrong reasons. I wanted my work to have more meaning, and I also wanted to try and tell the story of the people, especially in Sierra Leone, through portraiture, which I didn't think was a medium that had been used before to tell stories, through painted portraiture. People go and take photographs, but painted portraits and those sorts of stories I don't think had been done before. And my wife is a doctor for King's College London, and she told me that King's had set up something called the King's Sierra Leone Partnership, where they went into the main hospital in Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone, and established the protocols to actually help the hospital deal with the Ebola outbreak. So simple things like IV lines, the instigation of the country's first isolation unit. And without their assistance and intervention, the Ebola outbreak would have claimed many, many, many more casualties. I mean, as it is, it was obviously devastating. I think 7,000 people died, but it could have been many, many more than that. So that was how it all came about, really. So I went to Sierra Leone back in October 2015, so this time last year, and I met many of the nurses and Ebola survivors in Freetown.
So how long were you in Sierra Leone?
Not very long, actually. It would have been preferable to be out there for longer, but I was there for 11 days, and I was able to meet about 40 survivors, nurses, doctors, burial team personnel, all of whom had been affected in some way by Ebola, whether they were survivors, as I've said, or whether they were encountering stigmatization just through their association with Ebola. So that's to say, nurses who had treated Ebola patients would very often be stigmatized by their community. And really that's what this exhibition is as much about as anything else, is actually reporting the post-Ebola stigmatization that by and large has gone unreported in the media, that actually there's an offshoot of Ebola. Ebola itself is only part of the battle. It's people's experiences after the epidemic that are in many ways every bit as bad as the epidemic itself.
Do you see these paintings then as a type of reportage? Is it a kind of a journalistic approach that you're taking to this?
Yeah, I mean it's a combination really. There is an element of reportage. It is storytelling through the medium, obviously, of portraiture, but also with condensed versions of the audio interviews that I undertook in Sierra Leone are going to play alongside some of the paintings. So there is a sort of a journalistic element to what I'm doing. But that's where it stops. Each painting is a human being, irrespective of Ebola. Each painting is just the person's face, so it's not about the trappings of the disease. Site specificity, you don't have wards in the background or IV lines, it's just a person. So it's all about the person as an individual.
Putting the human face
on the human face, absolutely. Because these are all human beings, all people who have stories to tell.
Some people might be surprised by the portraits because when you talk about them being victims of Ebola or survivors of Ebola or having worked with in medical teams, most people look very healthy and look quite happy. Is that part of the message that you wanted to send out, that this disease, there's a life after this disease, it's not just devastation?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. All the people I met are not defined by the disease. And that's very much part of the message, as you know, although the disease was, took its toll, and in many cases took its toll quite severely. People have deep personal resources, even if they live in a country like Sierra Leone, which doesn't really have much of a welfare state. And the consequences of having Ebola or social stigmatisation are very real and very, are very serious. They are still human beings with an astonishing amount of dignity. And I think by dint of them not having a support framework, a support system, they have to assume the responsibility themselves. And, comporting themselves with dignity is one of the only things that they have control over. Before
you went to Sierra Leone, were you concerned for your own safety? Because the outbreak hadn't actually ended when you were out there.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I weren't. Obviously, Ebola has had quite justifiably, a very bad press. It is extremely contagious, and we never hear anything here other than the disaster stories of how devastating it is. We don't really hear about the people who survive it. So I was nervous. However, as soon as I got to Sierra Leone and I met people who'd survived it and the people who'd been treating it, it just puts your own neuroses, if you like, into perspective very, very quickly. That these guys have gone through hell, and you sort of very quickly forget about yourself. And it sounds a bit corny, but that's actually very humbling. It takes the onus off you and takes you out of your own head. And I found that to be extremely, from a personal point of view, actually very liberating. It was, it wasn't about me anymore. It was imperative that I was able to tell their story as well as I could. And that's a great thing, really. So yes, I was scared, but that evaporated very quickly when I was there.
How did you do these portraits? Were they done on site or were they done when you got home?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I would have loved to have done them on site, I prefer to work from life wherever possible. Just that human interaction of working with somebody in front of you, I find to be a very, it really helps with the process. But actually, practically, you can see the size of some of these paintings in the background. The practicalities of it is I can't take canvases like that on aeroplanes, and I can't take huge amounts of paint. And also ethically, I'm interviewing somebody who's just told me that they've lost 12 members of their family. It isn't then right to say, now can you sit for me for 5 hours while I paint your picture? So it was a combination of photographs, basically mug shots, and the audio interviews, which on reflection and listening to them when I got home, very much influenced the way I worked. It was like having the person there. It was the next best thing. And it was such a powerful experience interviewing these people that it I think, sort of transposed, if you like, into the work. But yeah, it's back here in the studio. I'm here with Mohammed Sidi Sharif at the waiting room by the King's College Partnership here at the Connaught Hospital in Freetown. And Mr. Mohammed, would you be so kind as to tell me your story, please?
Yeah, I will tell you. I'm a laboratory technician. I was working at one of the satellite clinic at Macaulay Street Hospital of Mountain Court, east part of Freetown. There I was working the holding center. I was the technician who's supposed to be collecting samples from suspected Ebola patients. But I was the only technician because all the other technicians ran away from the hospital. So I was left alone, nobody to assist. It came to a time I look at myself, I saw a blood on the forehead. So I closed my eyes up, I went to a bucket, there was chlorine. I washed my face for some time, but that day I was not happy. I came out. Later on, I came home. 14, I could not eat, I could not sleep, pain all over. So I told my wife, I said, look, call me 117. I have Ebola. So my wife started crying. She said, why? I said, no. I said, call 117. So she managed and called 117. It was then Dr. Daniel, who was a British doctor here. So they took the ambulance and went to my house and took me there. They took me to the Wilberforce Military Barracks Hospital. I was isolated there for about 3 days. After when my result came out, it was positive. It was then I was sent to the treatment center at Hastings. There, I was there every day. People were dying in my ward. So, but the most pathetic thing, the day that I was being taken in my house, when I saw my children crying,
Take your time.
my children crying, my wife crying, all of them falling on the ground, saying, Dad is gone,
Okay.
Dad is dead, Dad is gone. So it was then, I was in the treatment center, thank God. The people tried, the medical people tried there, but people were dying. I managed to survive the disease. Till November 10, I was discharged. But after being discharged, I had to spend nearly 3 months in the house. I lost my vision. I cannot see. It was then I contacted Dr. Oliver and I lost nearly all my family, brothers and sisters.
They died from Ebola, is this correct?
They died from Ebola, but we are not staying in the same house on dry up country at home because the other one managed when they heard about my illness. So when they were crying, people came from the neighborhood consoling them. There they got infected. They too died. About 7 of my family died like that.
The audio pieces that you are including in the exhibition, presumably each person, there's one for each portrait, or?
Right, okay, so I interviewed every single person that I met and every single person that I painted. And initially the intention was to have an MP3 file for next to every painting, so that it was a pure audio-visual experience with headphones. The reality is that I didn't actually receive funding for the exhibition, and it became, basically I couldn't actually do it. I couldn't financially afford to do it. So there are going to be what I consider to be 5 very different audio interviews from very different sorts of people. So a couple of Ebola survivors, a nurse, a sister on the accident emergency unit, and a burial team leader. So it sort of covers different areas and different perspectives of the Ebola epidemic. And each of those is going to be an audio interview that plays alongside their painting. In an ideal world, yes, I would have done all of them. I absolutely would have done it. And I would have loved to have done because I think I owe it to them. They gave me their story, they wanted their stories to be told. But in this instance, I can only tell their stories through the paintings and accompanying literature in the catalogue as well.
It seems that experience of going to this exhibition will be a little bit like seeing not only a painting exhibition, but an installation with these audio files included. Is that something that you have enjoyed playing with, or is that just a byproduct of the story you're telling?
I think it's both. It definitely is a byproduct. But equally, I think it adds an enormous amount of strength to the storytelling. It gives it a number of different layers. And I've never worked with audio before, so from an artistic point of view, I find it to be very, very interesting. And it's something that I can see working for future projects as well.
Have any of your sitters seen these portraits?
I've sent photographs to them, and they've been on social media. So most of these guys have a Facebook account, and I've put their portraits on their own Facebook accounts.
What feedback have you got?
No, they love them. I mean, I haven't had any negative feedback yet. What their deepest private feelings are, I don't know. But generally the feedback has been very positive, and their friends have all waded in, sort of saying how much they like them or how ugly I've made them look, but in a sort of jokey way, and it's a lot of good humour around it. But I think they can see the application, they see why I'm doing it. I mean, initially when I was first there, people were quite suspicious of me, as they thought that I was a journalist. So during the epidemic, a lot of journalists went into the country, took the story and left, which is journalism. I mean, that's part of the point. But from their point of view, it was they never heard from them again.
Kind of exploitative.
Yeah, exactly. Once they understood what I was doing and that I was an artist, and the audio interviews were part of a bigger exhibition, they couldn't wait to have their opinions recorded. They were all sort of knocking at my door saying, "Please interview me, please interview me," and it was fantastic. It was like a sort of unstoppable snowball that kept on gathering pace. It was great.
That's interesting how art has sort of taken away that suspicion and bridged that gap.
Yeah, I mean they'd never seen anything. They've never seen anything like it, and it was lovely to give them something back that was different.
What's next for you? Are you going to go back?
Yeah, I would love to go back. I mean, I wanted to go back earlier in the year, this year, but money and time wouldn't allow it. But hopefully next year, at some point, I'll go back and just find out, what's going on with the guys, how they are personally, how they've continued to evolve, because obviously the outbreak has finished now, and I think that the stigmatisation was very much a product of fear, and as the fear levels subside, it stands to reason that the stigmatisation will subside as well. So it would be lovely to go back and see that some of them have been reinstated into their jobs, and that the communities that they've come from have reintegrated them. But also just to see them as friends and just find out how they're going, really. And also see if any money is raised from this, how that's affected things, and what King Sierra Leone Partnership is able to do to further their research, not just into Ebola, but also any other malaria research, various other viruses that they work with out there.